In this lesson, I'll talk about the past tense. And the past tense is difficult because you have to memorize all those irregular past tense verbs. Unfortunately, I can't really help you with that. That's just down to you and doing lots of practice. However, what I hope I can help you with is the pronunciation of regular past tense verbs, because that's something that often causes a lot of communication difficulties for students who are learning English. So the past tense, just like the name sounds, it's used to talk about finished actions that are in the past. So here's an example. Yesterday, she called her sister. They spoke for a long time. So called is an example of a regular past tense verb because it ends in an ed, and spoke is an example of an irregular past tense verb. So the way that you make the past tense is you add ed to the regular past tense verbs, and there are some spelling exceptions, but you can see that there is always an ed at the end of a regular past tense verb. If the verb ends in a consonant and y, then you need to take away that y and add an I instead, and then the ed. And if the verb only has one vowel in it, then you need to double the consonant before you add the ed. But again, they all end in ed. So that's pretty easy, right? It's those irregular past tense verbs that are more difficult. They have many different forms, and you just have to memorize them. So you need to do a lot of practice to get those right. In general, the irregular past tense verbs involve either a vowel sound change or they end in the letter T. So if you look at the verb eat, the vowel sound changes to ate in the past tense. Find becomes found. So you're going from an I sound to an ow sound. Spend becomes spent with the T at the end. Go changes completely into went, but there's still that T at the end. So maybe that can help you a bit to learn those. So with all of these verbs, you'll notice that we only have one past tense form. However, the verb be is an exception. And I kind of think of be as the black sheep of the grammar family. If you say that somebody's a black sheep, it means they're the person who causes trouble in the family. So as usual, be has an exception in the past tense. It has two forms. So if the subject is I, the past tense of the verb be is was. For you, the subject you, the past tense is were. For he, she, and it goes back to was. And then you have we were, you were, they were. So this is the source of a lot of subject-verb agreement errors for students. So watch out for this one. The verb be has two past tense verb forms depending on the subject. So let's look now at the pronunciation of regular past tense verbs. If I look at this sentence here, on the weekend I dusted and then I cleaned the windows and mopped the floor, there are three regular past tense verbs there. And in order to understand how to pronounce them correctly, we need to think about how many syllables are in the past tense verb, because that's where students make a mistake. They put too many syllables in their past tense verbs. So if we look at the verb dust, there's only one syllable in that verb. And when I say syllable, I mean how many vowel sounds do we hear? So dust, There's only one vowel sound. I only hear and the rest are consonants. When I make that verb past tense, then there are two syllables. We hear two vowel sounds, dusted, and I, dusted. So that makes sense, right? We added extra letters, so we have an extra syllable. So yeah, there are two syllables in that past tense verb. But if we look at clean, it has only one syllable, right? Only one vowel sound, E, clean. But in the past tense, even though we've added ed to the word to make it past tense, it should not have two syllables. Do not say cleaned. That's incorrect. If you are saying that past tense verb correctly, it should only have one syllable. Cleaned, cleaned. So the only thing that's telling us that it's past tense is that d sound at the end. We're not adding an extra syllable. So yeah, we did add an extra syllable to dust, dusted, but with cleaned, we do not add an extra syllable. And if you do add an extra syllable, people are going to have a hard time understanding you. They're going to think you're saying something different. They're going to think you're saying clean it, maybe, because they won't recognize the word if you add an extra syllable to it. So let's look at mop. That only has one syllable. And again, even in the past tense, even though we added ed to the end of the word, you should not add an extra syllable. You're just changing the sound at the end. So it's not mopped, it's mopped, mopped. We can hear that it's past tense because we hear a T sound at the end. So let's review those sounds that we're hearing at the end. With dusted, we are actually hearing id being added to dust. With cleaned, the only sound we're adding there to make it past tense is a D sound. We're not adding id. And with mopped, the sound that we're hearing at the end is a T sound. So the mistake that students make with regular past tense verbs is they add that extra syllable to all of the past tense verbs. And that's not correct. Actually, most past tense verbs should not have an id sound at the end. Only verbs that end in a D or a T sound should have the extra syllable id. So for example, start, that verb ends in a T, so we do need to add the syllable id in order to pronounce the word. So if we just added a T sound at the end, or a D sound like we did with mopped or cleaned, it would be almost impossible to say, right? Imagine start or started. It would be really hard to say unless we added an extra syllable. So started, invited, lifted. We need that extra syllable to be able to say the past tense verb. It's the same with verbs that end in a D sound. It would be really hard to say added or added. I can't even do it. So we need to add the extra syllable to be able to say the past tense. Decided, avoided, guarded. But for all the other verbs that do not end in a T or a D sound, you should not be adding an extra syllable to those. So notice with invite and decide, we have a silent E at the end, but the sound that we're hearing is D or T. So they also need the id sound. So let's get some practice here and see if you understand this idea. If our base form of the verb is cook, how many syllables are in that verb? Just one, right? Cook. And then if we make it past tense, how many syllables are there? I hope you're going to say only one, because look, the verb does not end in a T or a D. So do not say this word cooked. It does not have two syllables. It should just be cooked. Okay, so it should just have a T sound at the end. If you say cooked, people will think you're saying maybe crooked, like not straight, or they'll think you're saying cook it. So make sure you make your mouth work hard to say kt in order to show that it's past tense, but do not add an extra syllable. How about clean? How many syllables in that? There's just one. And then when you say the past tense, how many syllables? Hopefully you are saying only one, right? Because it should be cleaned with a D sound at the end. How about start? Watch out, it has a T at the end, so there's only one syllable for the base form, but we do need to add that extra syllable in order to make it past tense. Started, started, two syllables. So we are adding an id sound to that verb because it ends in a T. Deliver, deliver. There are three syllables in that. How many in the past tense? Only three, because you should not add an extra syllable to it. It does not end in a T or a D. So delivered, we're only hearing the sound D at the end, not id. Do not add an extra syllable. Shop, how many syllables? Just one. How many in the past tense? Shopped, not shopped. It's shopped. One syllable with a T sound. Open, how many syllables? Two. How many in the past tense? Only two. The word does not end in a T or a D. And what's the sound we're hearing at the end? Opened, just a D sound. Fold, that verb ends in a D, so watch out. It's only got one syllable in the base form, but we do need to have two syllables in the past tense to be able to pronounce that word. So it does have the extra syllable id. Recover, how many syllables? Recover. There are three vowel sounds. So how many syllables in the past tense for this verb? It does not end in T or D, so it should only have three syllables. Recovered, not recovered. It's recovered with just a D sound at the end. So you might be wondering, how do you know if it should be T or D at the end? Because we do have some variation there. I would say don't worry too much about that. Worry more about the syllables. So try to pay attention to not adding extra syllables to your past tense verbs. Don't say cooked, cleaned, opened, shopped, recovered. That's the mistake that students make, adding extra syllables. The D or T issue, that will come naturally with practice. There is a rule for it. I will share it with you, but I recommend that you pay more attention to not adding extra syllables than being precise about the D or T sound. The D or T sound will kind of come naturally because of the rule about their pronunciation. So the rule here has to do with voiced and unvoiced consonants. So voiced consonants are consonants that require your vocal cords to vibrate. So when you say B, J, G, M, V, you can feel your vocal cords vibrating to produce those sounds. When you make unvoiced consonants, you're just making air sounds to make those consonants. So P, K, F, S. Your vocal cords do not need to vibrate to make those sounds. You just need to make a puff of air or a hiss of air to make those sounds. So when you have a voiced consonant, you need to end your past tense verb in a d sound. For example, robbed, changed, hugged, steamed, waved, buzzed. So you need to say that d sound clearly to make sure that people know it's in the past tense. If the last consonant is unvoiced, then you say a t sound, like clapped, worked, golfed, passed. So notice those are all one syllable words, even though we're adding extra letters at the end of the base form of the verb. It's only when you have a verb that ends in T or D that you need that extra syllable, like start, id, fold, id. For all the other ones, don't add that extra syllable. So like I said, don't stress over this too much because it's just really natural to put a d sound after a voiced consonant. It would be hard to say robbed, robbed. Your mouth is kind of already in the position to say the correct consonant. Robbed, changed. It's natural to put a d sound there. With the ones that are unvoiced, like clapped, it's pretty natural to do the t sound. It would be hard to put a voiced consonant after an unvoiced consonant. Clapped, worked. So don't worry too much about this rule. What you should focus on more, in my opinion, is not adding an extra syllable where you don't need one. Students who speak Arabic might find this trick helpful. If you have a hard time knowing whether to spell a word with a P or a B, if the consonant is unvoiced, then you know it's a P, like ripped, and then you hear pt. So when you have those two unvoiced consonants together, it can sometimes be a little bit easier to realize you're dealing with a P. But if you have two voiced consonants together, like bd, you can hear them when they're together like that, perhaps a little bit more clearly than when it's just a b by itself. So if you hear pt, then you know it's a P, two unvoiced consonants. Ripped, as opposed to ribbed, which is two voiced consonants together. That's a B. Tapped, that pt sound, two puffs of air. That's unvoiced. Tabbed, that's a B, voiced consonants. Mopped, unvoiced consonants. That's a P. Mobbed, that's a voiced consonant, B. So let's review what we learned. We use the past tense to talk about actions that are finished and in the past, just like the name suggests. Regular past tense verbs end in the letters ed, such as walked, hurried, dropped. Irregular past tense verbs don't follow a rule, but often the vowel sound changes or they end in a T, such as speak, spoke. We have a vowel change there. Take, took, another vowel change. Keep, kept. Lose, lost. Those past tense verbs end in T. The verb be has two past tense forms, was and were. I was, you were. He was, she was, it was. We were, you were, they were. Only regular verbs that end in a D or a T sound are pronounced with the extra syllable id. So don't add extra syllables to all past tense verbs. Only add them to the verbs that end in D or T. So for example, start gets an extra syllable, started. Fold gets an extra syllable because it ends in a D, folded. But the other verbs that don't end in a D or a T do not add an extra syllable to those. Regular verbs that end in a voiced consonant have a D sound at the end, and regular verbs that end in an unvoiced consonant have a T sound at the end. Okay, so I wish you the best of luck with memorizing all those irregular past tense verbs. And please remember, do not add an extra syllable to regular past tense verbs unless they end in a D or a T sound.